The NFL draft is only 3 days away, so I'm bringing you my second last mock draft of the season. This time, there's trades on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down and my second last mock draft of the NFL draft season. Of course, I hope you'll be hanging around after the NFL draft as well for heaps of fantasy football content and a full breakdown of how the draft went. I will be doing one more draft in the day before the actual draft itself. Plus, I'll be having updates over at FFD fantasyfootball.com. You can also ask us any questions over at Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. Plus, there's an opportunity for you to enter the FFD Fantasy League. You can do that by winning our mock draft content. Just guess who you think is going to be in the top 10. The closest person will win entry into the FFD League for the fourth time we're running, and it's going to be a lot of fun. If you've got any questions, you can also hit us up on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. I've also done write-ups over at football.razzball.com. Plus, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. But let's get into my sixth mock draft. We're a couple of days away. And as always, I'd like to shout out the guys who helped me out with this. I get a lot of information from the guys over at Walter Football. You can also check out the live show I did with Walt in the last couple of days as well. He and Charlie Campbell do a great job. Tony Pauline also gives me a lot of information too through his website. Plus, there's a whole heap of other sharp mock drafters around that you should also go check out. But I have been top 12 in accuracy in 3 of the last 4 years, and I'm doing my first entry in the Huddle Report contest as well, so we'll see how that goes too. But let's get into number 6 of my mock drafts, and obviously Cam Ward is first. There's basically nothing to say about this. Cam Ward will be the first pick unless something shocking happens. You notice those odds down the bottom. Got them from Bet365 because it's the best bookmaker I can get that's both here and in the US. The problem is, of course, there's a little bit of VIG worked in, so I do my best to work that out and give you rough probabilities, but it does mean the favorite's often slightly lower than it actually is meant to be. And that's the case here. I would say it's closer to a 98 or 99% chance of this occurring, but you're not going to get odds better than, say, minus 10,000 on this out there. So definitely not a pick you should be betting on, and definitely should not be thinking it's anyone but Cam Ward for this first pick. Second pick is more interesting. The bookies seem to think this is very, very, very likely to be Travis Hunter. I'm not so sure. There have been some reports around suggesting it really is closer to a 50-50 situation. Abdul Carter is still very much in contention. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think putting Carter opposite Myles Garrett gives them an excellent pass rush, gives them something to build around. I don't know that the way they plan to use Travis Hunter really makes a lot of sense. Having a guy who can play on both sides of the ball, but using him primarily as a receiver, it's going to be very difficult for him because when he goes out as a cornerback, he doesn't know what skills he's going to have to use, what play they're going to run. He's going to have to do basically all the defensive work and also be ready to do all the offensive work, but not play all the defensive plays. That's just not the right way round for me. I'd have him out there as a cornerback the whole time. It's a high-value position. You do see it being drafted this early in the draft. You don't see a receiver being drafted at 2 overall. We haven't seen that happen since Calvin Johnson, and Travis Hunter is not Calvin Johnson. Plus, if you play him as a cornerback, you can easily decide what snaps you want him out there for offensively. It's just an easier way of doing things. I understand why Hunter wants to be out there as a receiver. You get a whole lot more money as a receiver in the NFL, but rather than as a cornerback. But it really shouldn't be his choice. I think the Browns do risk messing this up here. They really should just be taking Abdul Carter and letting this be the Giants' problem. The Giants, meanwhile, also get kind of screwed over by the situation because they get Abdul Carter. He's an edge rusher. They don't really need an edge rusher. They've got Kayvon Thibodeau. They've got Brian Burns. This is not a need for them. They really need help in the secondary, and they could use an extra playmaker on offense as well. So Hunter would be great for them. Carter, really not that much of a help, but he's so far ahead of everyone else that I think they probably still take him anyway, especially with Shedeur Sanders very much not in the conversation for this number 3 pick, no matter what the probabilities say. 4 is where it has been getting interesting previously. I've had Will Campbell as the likely guy here if Shador wasn't taken. And now that Shador is highly unlikely to be taken in the top three, I do think this is near definitely going to be Campbell. Shout out to Charlie Campbell, no relation, on World Football. He's been talking about this for a long time. Will Campbell, almost a lock for this pick. If they don't go Campbell, Membo's really the other option as an O-lineman, or potentially Jelon Walker is the other guy I could see going here. But I think Will Campbell makes by far the most sense. Protect Drake May. He is your most valuable asset after all. And number 5, this is where it gets really interesting. Most people have this, the chalk pick. This is Mason Graham, the D lineman out of Michigan. Conflicting reports on him. Some people think he is an excellent talent and elite. Others have described him as a bit of a marshmallow man. Doesn't really have the build to get things done. But we've seen with his production, he's been very good. Solid interior pass rusher. I could see him going at 5. He definitely belongs in the top 10, but this might be a little bit early, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Jags go in another direction. There have been reports suggesting that Jelon Walker might be the guy to go here. I wouldn't put it past them to go Will Johnson if they love him. Cornerback is definitely a need for them. I just don't think Johnson really is a top 5 talent. Plus, they could potentially even go in Ashton Jeanty, or Membu also makes sense. They definitely need OT help as well. Graham is probably filling their greatest need. They really do need defensive tackles, and their GM has come out and said that they're going to get a couple out of this draft, but it's a pretty deep defensive tackle class. They don't need to get one here. They could definitely get one in the later rounds, and I know that they don't really think of defensive tackle as a premium position. So don't be surprised if this is Walker or Membo or even somebody else. I think this is where the draft is really going to pivot through. Ashton Jeanty still at number 6 for me. A lot of people have been confidently mocking him here for ages. Not everyone. The World Football guys have Will Johnson here. I also think Membu is a real option. And if Jelon Walker isn't taken earlier, wouldn't shock me entirely if they go Walker here either. I can definitely see the Will Johnson argument. They really need another cornerback. They brought in Nate Hobbs, but they need another outside guy, and Johnson would perfectly fit what they need to do. Jeanty obviously feels an actual need as well. They were awful at running back last year. Ever since they lost Josh Jacobs, they just haven't seemed to be able to move the ball. And they're going to need to, because Geno Smith cannot pick up this offense and carry it on his back. Having a running back who can also work as a receiver out of the backfield is going to be very useful for them as well. So Jeanty makes a lot of sense, but I could also see them going Johnson or Membu, depending on what they decide on. And here is that man, Membu. Now, I don't know that this is necessarily a lock. He could certainly go earlier here. Plus, if someone like a Mason Graham falls because Jelon Walker moves up, then I could see Graham going in this spot as well. Putting Graham next to Quinnen Williams is going to give you a very good D-line. I feel like that would help them out. But they do definitely need to help out Justin Fields. They can do that in a couple of ways. They can take away the scoreboard pressure by having a really solid defense, or they could improve their O-line by putting Membu at right tackle opposite Olu Fashanu, who they picked up last year in last year's draft at, I want to say, at 11. That would certainly help out Justin Fields. Alternatively, of course, they could give him another receiving weapon. There's talk of them potentially doing that here with Tyler Warren. For me, this is too early for Warren. They passed on Brock Bowers, who's clearly superior talent. Admittedly, it was a stronger class last year, but Bowers at 11, that should have been a lock for them instead of going for Fashanu. Fashanu was fine, but Bowers was a star. And I think they would have been happier to have Bowers and Membu rather than having Fashanu and Tyler Warren. And they should be, because Warren is not Brock Bowers. He's got a lot of the same skills, but at a lower level. He's not a great pass blocker. He's an okay receiver, but he's not an absolute star. So I think that Membu makes more sense here, or Mason Graham if he falls. And here's Jelon Walker. I feel like this is his fall. The Panthers definitely need edge rush help. Heck, they need help all the way across defense. I feel like Walker is the ideal situation for them. Mason Graham, if he falls, he would fit in here as well. If neither of those guys are available, I can imagine them trading back depending on who's falling. If Ashton Jeanty, for example, is falling, I can imagine, say, the Bears jumping up to try to get him. Even the Denver Broncos could want to move up to the edge, just inside the top 10 to get Jeanty if he is falling. So this could be a potentially valuable trade back situation because there are quite a few edge rushers behind Walker who are roughly similarly valued by a lot of teams. Thing is, we don't know what the Panthers think. I personally would be taking Michael Williams here, especially if Walker's not available. but it really depends on how they value him. And heck, even James Pearce isn't totally out of the question. There are character concerns here, but the talent is huge. And if they believe in the talent and the character concerns are overblown, then it wouldn't be out of the question to see even him go in this spot. So the Panthers have got options, but I do expect they'll go D-line in some way. I think the idea of them going Ted McMillan here is very, very low. And here is Micah Williams. I really tossed up what to do with the Saints. I had Shedeur Sanders here last time, but we are getting a lot of reports suggesting that the Saints are more likely to go with a quarterback in the second round. It's also suggested they prefer Jackson Dart over Shedeur Sanders. I think that's more of a scheme fit thing. It does kind of suit what Kellen Moore likes out of his quarterbacks, more of a physical quarterback than kind of like an accurate pocket passer that you get in Sanders. But they need to understand that Dart definitely doesn't belong at the 9th pick. Now, teams will sometimes just grab their quarterback at the pick. We saw the Denver Broncos do it last year, for example. But surely the Saints recognize they've got a good chance of getting Dart late first round into the second round. They can't love him so much that they believe taking him at 9 makes sense. So trade back definitely on the cards. If they choose to stick and pick here, though, I do think that Michael Williams makes a lot of sense. They need a lot of edge rush help. I know Albert Breer has come out and said that if they don't take quarterback, and he thinks they probably won't, then they'll probably target the edge rush. And I'm inclined to agree. I do feel like it is their greatest weakness behind quarterback. And I think they could even go through without taking a quarterback at all and just going with Spencer Rattler or until Derek Carr is ready to play. Number 10, Tyler Warren, could easily go as early as 7 to the Jets, but I feel like this is more likely somewhere here or to the Colts at 14 makes the most sense. Look, he is clearly the number 1 tight end in this class to a lot of people. I don't really agree, and he does have some people who don't like him as much as, say, Colston Loveland. I can understand why. Not the greatest blocker. I feel like he did play solidly last year, but he's not Brock Bowers, and he's been compared to Brock Bowers, and I think that's a little bit unfair. Having said that, the Bears do have a couple of needs, and getting a good pass catcher in to replace Keenan Allen is one. There's not a star wide receiver in this class, but if they can get a better tight end play compared to what they're getting out of Cole Kmet at the moment, I think that would really help them. So Warren here does make a lot of sense. If they don't go Warren, well, hopefully Ashton Genty falls to them. We know that Ben Johnson loves the idea of having that dual offense. He had Gibbs and Williams going last year, obviously at the Lions. Getting Genty in here and lining him up with DeAndre Swift would be an excellent running attack that would take a lot of pressure away from Caleb Williams. But another way to take pressure away from Caleb Williams, get some O-line help. I think that Kelvin Banks is a viable option here. I know that most think he's going to go more in that 11 to 13 range, but he should certainly be gone by 13. So this is not an egregious reach by any means. I would personally take him, especially if Warren is gone. I'm definitely going O-line because there's a good chance that Membu is going to fall. But even if he doesn't, I think Banks makes sense here. Last option here, they could go D-line, but I think they're more likely to go with the offense. There is Kelvin Banks. I've really tossed up this pick. I had Will Johnson last time. I do think Banks makes a little bit more sense for the 49ers. I feel like it's just a greater need for them. They really need to get that run game going. It wasn't good last year, or certainly not as good as it has been in the past. They also need to make it easier for Brock Purdy, who is realistically a pretty average quarterback. Very much needs the system going around him. He needs a lot of weapons, but he also needs an O-line that can give him time to pass because he is prone to mistakes. Otherwise, I think that bringing Banks in, shoring up that O-line is really going to help the rest of the offense pop. If they don't go with Banks, then surely it's got to be defense. There was talk about them needing speed on defense. I think Micah Williams would make sense, though he's not a true speed rusher. I think they'd probably prefer Walker. Kenneth Grant has been mooted here. I think that this is a little bit early for him personally, but some people I rate definitely believe this is a pick for him. And I think Will Johnson as an outside cornerback makes a lot of sense as well. Then there's the Cowboys, of course. And this is looking more and more like being a wide receiver. The real question is, which one? I would definitely go with Ted McMillan. I feel like he's got a lot more upside as a possible alpha receiver. And here he doesn't even need to be the alpha receiver. They've already got CeeDee Lamb. He's just a natural complement to Lamb. He's big. He's got a wide range. He can't separate particularly well. But when you're getting one-on-one coverage, because Lamb is distracting everybody, you can definitely get enough space to be a lot better. Kind of fits in that Quinton Johnston mold of being a bigger guy without so much speed, but very good with contested catches. It also takes some pressure off Jake Ferguson in the red zone, allow them to run the ball more effectively in the red zone by giving them another big body target. So I prefer McMillan. Had been some talk about Matthew Golden potentially being the pick, but I still think McMillan makes a lot more sense. Golden is more of a speed threat, and they could play well opposite Lamb now that they've lost Brandon Cooks, but I just think McMillan's a far better player, and the bookies certainly starting to agree. Golden is definitely thought of as being likely to fall a lot more than McMillan is. And here's Will Johnson, who is falling, in my opinion. I think he belongs higher than this. He goes to the Dolphins, who have a range of options. There's so many things they could do here because they have so many needs. And I think they could fill any of them. I think O-line probably makes the most sense. Patrick Paul should not be playing left tackle. And the biggest concern here is that if you don't have a strong O-line, Tua Tagovailoa is realistically one head knock away from a career ender. So I would be trying to improve your O-line. But with no Kelvin Banks on the board and Will Johnson and Membou well gone, unless they're planning on trading up, I feel like they might not have that choice. And this feels just a little bit early for the likes of Gray Zabel, etc. So for that reason, I would go defense. The question is, which one? They could potentially go defensive tackle, but that's not really a need for them compared to a lot of other positions. They could go safety, but I think it's a bit early for a safety. Emanwari and Starks are both very good players, but I think taking them 13 overall is asking a lot, even in a weak class. I would go cornerback, assuming Will Johnson's here. If Johnson's not here, then I think this is too early for Barron and the others. But you cannot be starting with Storm Duck and Cam Smith as your outside cornerbacks. And it does seem like Jalen Ramsey is going to be gone. So cornerback's something they need to attack in the first 2 days of the draft. But I think they also need some O-line help and some safety help. It's just a question of when they get them and which player falls to them. This has been an interesting pick. I've really wanted to give them a guard quite a few times, but it just feels a little bit too early for a guard. This feels like a team that nearly needs to trade down and then take a Gray Zabel or a Booker, for example. Trade down to 17 maybe. The Bengals could move up to 14, jump the likes of the Falcons and Cardinals and get the edge rusher they need, especially if Williams falls. But if that doesn't happen, I think Colston Loveland makes a lot of sense here. They haven't had a good tight end in Indy for a long time, and Loveland is a very good player. He's not quite Tyler Warren, but he's very solid. Definitely deserves to be going somewhere in the first round. The bookies have him going somewhere around this spot. They think top 17 for him, just not quite top 10. And this is really the only team between 11 and 17 that even needs a tight end. So I do think this is considered likely to happen. I'm not as convinced, but I'm certainly going to mock it because I think it's more likely than anything else in particular to happen. Rather than cycling through Kylan Granson and Mo Alley Cox and Andrew Ogletree and all the other guys they got going, they finally just get an every down tight end that can provide an option for Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, depending on whoever is their starting quarterback through next season. And here's a new one for me. I've had Shamar Stewart down at 27 the last couple of mocks, so I have mocked him as high as the top 10. This is a guy I know a lot about because I had him in college fantasy last year, and he was a constant disappointment. So much talent there, and yet 1.5 sacks all of last season. I think he's got like 4 sacks in his college career all up. For a first-round edge rusher that we're talking about in the top 10, that is insanely low. I know the speed's there. I know he looks great at the combine. But if you can't turn the corner and actually get that production, what use are you? To me, this is too early. But I'm not trying to say what should happen. That's maybe something I'll do another year. I'm trying to say what will happen. I do feel like the Falcons may take the risk here. Falcons haven't had an edge rusher in the first round for years. They keep on taking offensive players. They've been going for guys like Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson and Drake London. And then, of course, last year they finally had the chance. Latu's sitting there, and they were going to get him, and then they get Michael Penix, even though they already had Kirk Cousins, which I still think is a stupid pick, no matter how good Penix turns out to be. Just doesn't make sense to me at all. Instead, they miss out on the top edge rushers of this class when they could have had last year's Latu, who was better than all of these guys. So they have to make a choice. I think a trade down's a real option here, and they have talked about this. Certainly, a lot of people have suggested that's an option for them. But I think if Shamar Stewart's there, this is the kind of guy they might potentially go with, even though he doesn't really generally fit what they try to do. Also, don't discount the likes of a Mike Green potentially, but I think anyone else might be a little bit high. Maybe James Pierce potentially, if they feel like the character concerns were not an issue for them. And here's another guy who has been rising, Derek Harmon. I didn't even have him in my first couple of mocks. I had his teammate Jordan Birch, in fact. But Birch more of kind of a run stuffer. I feel like Harmon pressures the quarterback a little bit more, has a little bit more upside, and teams seem to love him. There are a lot of rumors suggest if he gets to the Steelers will take him here. don't even have him getting to the Steelers. The Cardinals need help in 3 spots. They need O-line help, though I don't think they need it badly. And Kelvin Banks is gone, so anyone else would be a bit of a reach. They need D-line help, which is what I've given them here. Given them Derek Harmon. There's no really good edge rush options here, but Harmon is definitely a good option in this spot. And finally, cornerbacks an option, but for me, this is a bit too early for Jahdae Barron, even though I've given them to him before. I understand why the Cardinals want to drop down because they do have quite a few needs that belong a little bit later. But if I feel like if a guy they like is here, they'll definitely stick and pick or potentially move down, then try to move back up a little bit. We've seen them do that at times in the past with guys like Paris Johnson in the last couple of years. And here's Mike Green. This is too early for Mike Green, but I feel like the Bengals are still going to go with an edge rusher. Trey Hendrickson apparently may be considering staying in Cincy and signing. I don't know how they're going to do that with how little money they have, but it is a good fit for both sides there if they can make the money work. But even opposite him, they've still got nothing. It's Joseph Asai and Miles Murphy. I know Murphy's a first rounder, but he hasn't really produced like one. They need to add more to that rotation. Even if they don't do that, defensive tackle is an option because their guys are aging or gone and they haven't really replaced them with real quality. So I like the idea of taking D-line, but it's not out of the question they go a safety like Emanwari potentially or Starks. Cornerback's an option too, but there's no one that's likely to be available in this range, so they probably need to trade to get one, I think. Maybe if Johnson falls, they might go up and get him, for example. Now, here's Gray Zabel going at 18 to the Seahawks. I've given them a number of players in the past. I've gone wide receiver a couple of times, and I still think that's possible. I can see a Matthew Golden going here. I also think this is a pretty natural floor for the tight ends. I can imagine if Loveland's falling, they might get him here to replace Noah Fant. But I do feel like that O-line makes the most sense. Besides Charles Cross, they really don't have much going on along the O-line. I feel like they need someone to challenge. I think it's Abraham Lucas over at right tackle, and their guard spots and center spots were awful. Zabel's very versatile, can play across all of those spots. You bring him in, you see what spots were looking weakest, and you slot him in, and you're going to have some success. That first versatility also makes him less risky. The problem is, short arms make him significantly more risky, and playing in a generally lower conference isn't ideal either. But I still feel like Zabel is a guy that teams could use, and I think he'll probably go ahead of Booker because of the possibility that he can play tackle. Tyler Booker more of a guard prospect, despite being a clearly better player. And I should mention, Tyler Booker doesn't even make it into this mock for, I think, the first time for me. I feel like I'll probably slide him into my last mock because I do think he belongs somewhere in this first round. I just can't really work out where he goes. He's a guy who I have consistently mocked in the same place. Jahad Campbell, I've always had going to the Buccaneers in all 6 mocks, but it's far from a lock. I just think it's the most likely outcome to happen. We know the Buccaneers like him, as to the Falcons. We know it's a natural fit. We know that they've taken first round inside linebackers before. They took Devin White 5th overall, of course. And Levante David is definitely aging. They definitely need help at their inside linebacker spots. Plus, Campbell, if it all goes wrong, can shift back to the edge where he started out. He's not as experienced off the ball. There is some also concern about a shoulder injury, which could cause him to fall. So it wouldn't be out of the question to see an edge rusher here. Plus, I think that they do want some cornerbacks. So I think they're probably going to get them on day 2 and day 3 because it's not a major weakness for them. And there's not anyone naturally sitting here that has value as a cornerback. So Campbell makes most sense, but I think edge rush is more likely. It's just picking the correct one is going to be very tough. At 20, I've got the Broncos going Amari and Hampton. Don't be surprised if they trade all the way up to 8 or 9 to go get Ashton Genty if he falls. They can afford to be aggressive. They don't have a lot of major holes. Running back is the main one. Last season, they obviously cycled between Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Estime. Ugh. I don't like that whole situation. They lost Williams, of course, to the Cowboys, which isn't really that major a loss, but they need someone else. They can't go forward with Estime and McLaughlin. Hampton is a big back, a very natural complement to McLaughlin, who I think they like a little bit better of the two. He is shifty and does give them options, but he's not a natural receiving back. Luckily, Hampton is a good receiving back, so they can use McLaughlin as more of a change of pace back. I like this situation. I feel like it potentially works for them. So Hampton is a realistic fit, but I could see them going Genty. And look, if this is Travion Henderson, that wouldn't shock me at all. If they go other position, I think that's possible. Wide receiver, I don't really love. I feel like they get enough out of not only Cortland Sutton, of course, but Marvin Mims, Devon Vele, and of course Troy Franklin. Between them, I feel like you're going to get something. Hey, remember when you all thought Troy Franklin was going to be amazing for fantasy, and I told you he wasn't? Yeah. Um, Having said that, I do still think they don't really need a wide receiver. A couple of other things they could go with, tight end, for example, and D-line and O-line are always options for all teams. Speaking of D-line, here's Kenneth Grant, who I could see going as high as the top 10, I think, to the Bears, I think is not out of the question. But I could also see him falling out of the out of the first round entirely if Team Society's more of a nose tackle and pressuring inside defensive linemen. I personally think he can do enough to provide pressure, even though he's not going to get a lot of sacks, to belong at least in this 20 range or a little bit earlier than this. But I do think it looking more and more like he's going to go after Derek Harmon and potentially even after Walter Nolan, depending on whether a team falls in love with Nolan or not. So I've got Grant going to the Steelers. Really conflicting reports on what the Steelers are going to do. I went into this mock expecting that I was going to put Sanders here. After I put Sanders to the Saints, I kind of regretted it straight away and wanted to move him to the Steelers. But when I went to do this, looking through all the reports that have been coming through in the recent days, trustworthy reporters, guys that I trust, saying all sorts of stuff that conflict each other. We've heard that Mike Tomlin loves Sanders. Then we've heard that Sanders' interview went terribly. Then we said that the Steelers in general love Shedeur Sanders. Then we got told, oh, well, they do like him, but they'd probably prefer to take a defensive tackle or maybe even a wide receiver or a running back. Then we got told they like Jalen Milroe. Then we had Sanders himself saying that he was going to go at 21. So if you want him, you're going to have to get in front of 21. Craziness. I just don't understand it. So no Sanders here for me, even though I think this is a realistic landing spot and where I might have him in my last mock because it's more likely to get me points that way. But I think it's probably more likely that he actually falls below this spot, which is a weird situation here. I do think he belongs probably somewhere here or higher, but I don't know. The NFL's weird. We know this. So Kenneth Grant is the option. And another defensive tackle coming right after him to the Chargers. This is very much the floor for Colston Loveland for me. I love the idea of Loveland going to this spot. I can also imagine Kenneth Grant, two former Wolverines, going to Jim Harbaugh. Makes so much sense. But neither is available. Walter Nolan instead. We know that Harbaugh loves sorting the trenches out. I think the O-line's pretty solid, but D-line definitely needs some help, especially on the interior. They did bring in one guy, I think it was Hand, but they need more, or at least brought back one guy. So I think Walter Nolan makes a lot of sense. And it wouldn't surprise me if they get another defensive tackle later in the draft as well. Teams are very much split on him. There are some that think that he's just not good enough, that his tape showed that it was very inconsistent. There's some character issues, and others think he has massive upside. So it really depends on what the teams involved believe as to whether he goes in the first round or where he goes in the first round. Matthew Golden, a little bit of a fall for me. I think he probably belongs higher than this. The odds say that he's probably going to go somewhere in the top 17. I can't find a spot for him that's not the Cowboys. I have no idea who would take a wide receiver that high up. And I can only imagine that's talking about someone trading up. But I don't think there's any team really desperate for a wide receiver. I can see the Chargers taking a wide receiver, and I nearly mocked them Golden here. I think the Packers probably take a wide receiver with the right ones there, but I don't even think that Golden's the right receiver for the Packers. They've already got quite a few guys in this same sort of speed range idea. They've got Jaden Reed already, who's a small, quicker wide receiver. They've got kind of like wide receiver 2 guys like Romeo Dobbs. Christian Watson's quick, but obviously injured a lot. Zontavian Wicks is also in the rotation. Do they need to add another kind of average, solid wide receiver 2 guy? I know that Golden offers a lot of speed and does have some upside, but to me, he's not an alpha guy, and that's what they need. So if Ted McMillan's not here, I think this is less likely, but I have seen a lot of people saying that Golden is a legitimate alternative, and Green Bay has brought a lot of wide receivers into meetings, and they've even spoken to Golden twice. So I do think they're seriously considering wide receiver here. And based on the fact there's no natural defensive tackles falling, I think that it's probably the most likely option. That or cornerback. I could see a Jahdae Barron here, Golden's teammate, going to this spot as well, because realistically, the Packers do need to improve in the slot. Keyshawn Nixon, very good on special teams, not as good in defense. Here's Nick Emmanwori. I feel like it's the right range for him. I've mocked him earlier at 13 to the Dolphins and 17 to the Bengals, and I feel like that's still possible. But I feel with safeties in general, they nearly always fall. I think that's going to happen here. I think we find Emmanwori and Starks both sit somewhere in the 24 to 30 sort of range, maybe 32, I think is where we're going to see both of them go. I think Emmanwori deserves to go earlier, although a lot of bookmakers actually have Starks as the slight favorite to be the first safety off the board, which is a little bit nuts to me. I think Emmanwori is clearly the top guy. Look, the Vikings clearly need safety help. They've lost Cam Bynum and his dance moves, unfortunately, to the Colts. Harrison Smith will be gone soon as well, as he is old, not compared to me, obviously, but old compared to the NFL, especially for a safety. Emmanwori, very good prospect, as is Starks. I think either going here makes a lot of sense, but I think it's even more likely the Vikings trade back. They don't have a lot of picks. This is a spot that a team's going to want to trade up to, either to get an offensive lineman ahead of the Texans. I can imagine the Chiefs doing that, for example, or maybe even the Commanders. Or I can imagine a team trading up into the first round to grab either Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart. So this is the kind of landing spot that would make that possible. If they stick and pick, though, I expect a safety or a cornerback if the right one's sitting here. Jahdae Barron, for example, would make a lot of sense here as well, or any of the other guys that I'll talk about soon. This is something new for the Texans. I gave him Josh Simmons last time. Most people mock them O-line. The bookmakers had O-line as a heavy favorite. I'm not so sure. I gave them Emeka Egbuka quite a few times early on. I've also given them a defensive tackle heaps of times. I feel like that still makes a lot of sense because there's significant needs for them. And I don't know that they need an O-lineman. They brought in a heap of solid average guys, and there's not really anyone that stands out going in this spot. They could go for Tyler Booker, but then they're kind of locked into having a guard or guard for him. And I don't know that that's really their greatest need. They could go with Josh Simmons, but it really depends on their injury assessment for him. Josh Connolly, maybe Gray Zabel falls. But I don't know, maybe Jackson. I don't see this as being a natural spot. So that was Jonathan Jackson, by the way. So I'm giving them Egbuka instead, who does seem like he's likely to go somewhere in the top 28. Hard to work out exactly where. I think the Packers is also a possible spot for him. Commanders is not out of the question, but there aren't a lot of teams that need a wide receiver in this range. The Texans are one who do, though. Nico Collins obviously is their number one guy. Christian Kirk is in there, but I don't know. I think he's a little bit overrated. He will probably play in the slot. We haven't really seen him perform particularly well lately, so I think that having another natural number two guy with Tank Dell out for the whole year and then being able to reassess after that is an option. It's another way to kind of help out CJ Stroud. So Egbuka goes here, but I think it probably ends up being an O-lineman, unfortunately. Here's Jahdae Barron. His fall ends. It does seem like he is certainly going to fall, but this is quite a long way. I think he probably goes somewhere in that 20 to 25 range, but I feel like the Rams is kind of his floor. They definitely need a cornerback. A slot cornerback makes a lot of sense. Barron is smaller, and I think he's better suited to that. I think he doesn't really have the size, even though he has the speed, to compete with a lot of the top outside wide receivers. So for that reason, I would have him going a little bit later because I do feel like slot cornerbacks and nickel guys do tend to be a little bit undervalued in the draft, even though we did see with Kyler Gordon's contract that if you're a slot cornerback, you can certainly make some money and get utilized effectively. It's just that I feel like that Barron going earlier than this would be a little bit of a reach. So that for that reason, I got Barron, but it could be another one of the cornerbacks. There's plenty of options there. Trey Amos is someone I liked quite a lot early on. Maxwell Hairston was very quick at the combine. Siobhan Ravel obviously got some injury issues, as was Benjamin Morrison, but either could certainly go in the first round. I've seen them mocked there by plenty of people, and I've had all of those guys in my first round at times. But in this stage, I'm going with Barron. Also, don't discount O-line or D-line entirely. I just think O-line doesn't really make sense with Jackson re-signing to play left tackle. A lot of people talking about quarterback here. I don't think that's going to happen. Mel Kiper, for example, has mocked them a quarterback. That seems crazy to me. They're trying to win now. Why would they go get a quarterback when that's not helping them win currently? I don't think that makes any sense. Tight end, I don't think one's going to fall, but it is very much the floor for Colston Loveland. And here's a move. Malaki Starks comes up to 27 to go to the Ravens. I have been giving him an edge rusher previously, but that was because Shamar Stewart was falling. He's on here now, so they kind of get the next highest value guy, which is Malaki Starks. Definitely fills in a need, allows Kyle Hamilton to move a little bit further up the field and play closer to linebacker, at least in the box. I've heard a lot of people say that they want to go edge, or at least some people say that they want to go edge. And if not, I've also heard that they might go linebacker. But I think that's unlikely in the first round unless Jahad Campbell is here. So for that reason, I'm going with Starks. That kind of allows Hamilton to move up to closer to a linebacker and help out that position. That's assuming they don't like any of the edge rushers that are sitting here. I think Donovan Ezeruaku. There's no way I'm pronouncing that right, but excuse the accent. He's a real possibility here. Potentially James Pierce could go here. Maybe Stewart falls. Maybe Mike Green falls. Heaps of guys that could go here. It's just who they like that's the issue. Maybe Jackson as well, and Jackson. And here is Ezeruaku. Look, I love the fit here. Dan Campbell loves this kind of guy, a real leader. Also a speed rusher to go opposite Aiden Hutchinson. It's definitely a need for the Lions. They're strong in so many positions, but they just need a little bit of pressure off the edge. I think they could also go O-line, and we could definitely see Tyler Booker go here. He would be another Dan Campbell fit as a real leader, but I love the idea of going edge rusher here. I know that Walt from World of Football really loves the idea of JT Tumalo going there. I think he or his OSU teammate Jack Sawyer makes sense. I've mocked Sawyer there before, but I feel like he's more of a second round guy now. So I'm going Ezeruaku, but this could be any one of a number of people in this area. Commander's very tough to mock to at the moment. There's so many different spots, and it wouldn't surprise me if they end up just trading out with a team that needs a quarterback and wants to jump the other teams and go get one. Josh Connolly is a natural fit, though. They definitely need help on the O-line. He can play tackle. Right tackle is probably their biggest weakness. That's why I didn't put Booker here instead. So I can imagine a Connolly or potentially Josh Simmons in this spot. James Pierce not out of the question as a risky upside edge rusher that they need. Defensive tackle would also make sense here, but there's no one that really I think is the right value, which is why I haven't given them one in this mock. Cornerback also not totally out of the question. They have a lot of needs that aren't desperately needs. They could just use a small upgrade. For example, wide receiver and running back. They definitely need upgrades in both of those positions, though I do hear they're probably going to happen on day 2. 30. Maxwell Hairston goes to the Bills. I've mocked him traditionally to the Rams. I've had the Bills obviously going with Starks, but with Starks going at 27, I'm able to give the Bills a different secondary player instead. And I feel like they're going to go in one of those directions: cornerback, safety, or D-line. Problem is no natural D lineman here. I have given them Alfred Collins in the past. I do feel like they need to stop the run, and I think a defensive tackle makes a lot of sense here. The problem is Collins doesn't really belong in the first round. He is more of a nose tackle type, and they tend to go later than they otherwise would. This is a weak class, though, so you could see those guys rise. Starks would make sense if he's still here. I feel like this is closer to his floor. His true floor is probably the Eagles who'll catch him if he falls. But look, cornerback, a real option here. It won't necessarily be Hairston. Could be a Trey Amos, could be Ravel, could be Morrison, could be any other number of corners that are around. There really is no clear consensus on who goes after Travis Hunter and Will Johnson. 2 teams left. Josh Simmons going to the Chiefs. Obviously a little bit injury prone. Well, currently injured anyway. Therefore, it's a little bit of a risk. But they do have Jalen Moore and Jawan Taylor, so they can afford to take that risk. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if they traded up to get their guy. If they go up to 24, they can make sure they get ahead of the Texans, who are highly likely to take an O-lineman, even though I didn't mock them one. The problem is that every time I mock KC and O-lineman, they don't take one. Last year, they didn't take one. The year before, didn't take one. Very frustrating. Hopefully, this is the year they change their mind and get it right. So, the signing of Jalon Moore doesn't, for me, necessarily change that. I don't even know that he's clearly a starter. And Juwan Taylor, he's not anything special. We've seen that Patrick Mahomes has been running for his life at times recently, and that really showed up in the Super Bowl. So they need better O-line help. So it's Simmons for me. Could easily be somebody else. I think it's unlikely to be someone like a Tyler Booker because it really is the tackles they need help on. But if they love a guy like Booker, they could potentially go interior and just have an excellent interior guy. And we've seen them force interior guys out wide like they would Joe Tooney anyway. So you never know. And finally, it's the Eagles. No, it's not. It is a trade. I think this specific trade is possible, but if it's happening for a very specific reason. The Browns have the 33rd pick, so they're actually only trading up one spot. So they're jumping for a couple of reasons. Firstly, to make sure no other team does it, and secondly, to get that valuable fifth year option that you get with any first round pick, a club option allowing you to keep that player on a lower contract price for the fifth year. You can only do if you take someone in the first round. And that's a lot more valuable for a quarterback who would usually expect a much larger contract going into their first non-rookie contract. So for that reason, it makes sense to take a quarterback in this spot. So it's not a big trade for the Eagles. Doesn't hurt them too much, but they get a little bit of value by the Browns moving up. Browns obviously do need a quarterback. Can't really go into the season with Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett. I know that they're talking about that, but I don't think that makes sense. Obviously didn't want to take Sanders or Jackson Dart at number 2 overall, and rightly so, frankly. But so much more value here. So they can go get Shedeur Sanders or maybe Jackson Dart if Sanders is gone by doing this trade up. Plenty of other teams could do exactly the same trade up. Giants, Saints, Jets, Raiders, for example. Giants, I know, do like Sanders enough, just weren't willing to take him at 3 overall. So I feel like they're the next most likely to really want him. I feel like any team all the way up to, say, the Vikings at 24 could be a trading spot. Maybe even go up to the Broncos. Potentially to go grab someone to jumping over the Steelers. I think anything higher than that would be a little bit crazy, but I do think we're probably going to have a team trade into the first round to get a quarterback. I feel like that's a good chance of that happening if one of the quarterbacks falls. If the Eagles are still here, on the other hand, I can imagine them taking an edge rusher like James Pierce. Could go O-line potentially, and I feel like this is where Malaki Starks would end his fall if he is going to fall at all. And that's all we've got for my second last mock draft of the season. As always, please make sure if you've got any questions, pop them in the comments below, or you can hit me up on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with Noah. You can also enter our mock draft contest, I should say, for an opportunity to play against me in the FFD League. That is a lot of fun every year. It's the 4th year we're running it. Looking forward to having a go at this one. This year I made the final, didn't get it done. Last year my colleague Kiwi won it, so see if you can beat us this year. You can also hit us up on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with Noah if you prefer. My draft will continually be updated over at ffdfantasyfootball.com, but I will try to make sure I pop online and do one last video on the Thursday morning or potentially on the Wednesday night before the draft. Plus, you can check out another write-up of this mock over at football.razzball.com. Lastly, please like and subscribe. That really helps us out, and I look forward to hitting you guys up next time on the Fantasy First Down.